So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Rising Network. Lily here from the Rising Network, and a warm welcome to our online event, Intercultural Dimensions in HR, with invited guest speaker, Eva Tarabichi, who is a trainer and certified coach. She is very used to lots of experience working with international teams within HR functions, as well as individuals. When I originally connected with Eva, she was actually based in Cambridge, UK, now recently moved to Bonn, Germany. And Eva, I know you very well, you've moved across different locations in the world. So if anyone knows about intercultural dimensions and relocating, you're definitely the best person for that. So a warm welcome for today, and thank you for joining us. So what will you learn from today's session? So what is the intercultural dimension? The importance of addressing the intercultural dimension and why you can't ignore it. The challenges and opportunities that lie within the intercultural dimension. How to set up the foundations, processes, and structure of a global team, and something really relevant right now, especially due to COVID-19, how to manage virtual teams. So thank you for listening. I would now like to hand you over to Eva, who will give you a brief introduction to herself and then take us through her session on intercultural dimensions in HR. Thank you, Eva, over to you.
Thank you so much, Lily, for this warm and lovely introduction. And as Lily said, I'm going to start by introducing myself, because I think it's always nice to know who you're speaking with or who you're listening to. Sorry, 1 second. I am Eva Tarabichi, the founder of Tarabichi Coaching, and I help my clients to build their worldwide success. And I'm building my work on 3 things, which is my life experience. I've lived abroad a lot. I'm originally German, but I've lived in Malaysia for 3 years, in China for 2, in Belgium for 7, in France for just half a year, and then in lovely Cambridge for 4 years, just before moving back here in January. The second thing I'm building my work on is my international study background. So I studied Chinese, I speak 5 languages, and then I majored in my master's in EU foreign politics. And then that leads me to the third thing I am basing my work on, which is my international work experience. So before becoming a certified coach, I worked in Brussels in EU lobbying, and that is a very international crowd that is working there. So now when I work with my clients, that really helps me to understand where they are coming from and the situations that they are facing, which leads me to the clients I'm working with. So you see this lovely little colorful crowd there. Those are my individual clients. I work a lot with international professionals individually as well. But I also hold talks in firms, recently one for TUS Park UK. They are situated in the Cambridge Science Park. You can see a little picture in the Bradfield Centre below there, that was for them. And when I was in the UK, I also worked with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, where I coached a few of their rising talents and also did some coach-to-coach, trainer-coach training. And I also work for LearnShip, which is a big online learning platform, and I'm an intercultural trainer there. And that pile of books is just a hint at my hobbies. I'm a total geek. And so in my free time, I like to read anything about other cultures or working together fruitfully despite cultural diversity, or let's say because of cultural diversity. That's enough about me, I think. I actually really want today's workshop to be about you as people working in HR or people managing diverse teams. I want it to be about your power to put intercultural skill development on the agenda of your organizations and to strategically rethink the cultural makeup of your workforce. And lastly, your power to find out how to make the best use of your multicultural team members, because there is a lot of dormant potential that can easily be overseen. where is this intercultural dimension? What do I mean by this when I say intercultural dimension in human resource management? I think it comes from general trends in our societies that dribble into the workplace. It comes from diversity and inclusion policies, which have now been in place for some decades, luckily, and they're translating really well or starting to translate well. It comes from people working more and more in global virtual teams. So a recent study done by Culture Wizard showed that 89% of office employees in over 90 countries work on 1 to 3 global virtual teams. So there's almost nobody in an office anymore nowadays that does not work on a global virtual team. Then there's obviously the broad trend of globalization and the fact that most business right now can't afford anymore to just stay local. They need a bigger market outreach. And then you have cross-border projects. If you think of science or of NGOs, you know, in science, projects often aren't funded if there are not at least members of so and so many countries in that project. So there's a huge international intercultural dimension there. And then you obviously have the broad trend of our Western populations diversifying, and not only the Western ones, but I guess the Western ones started a bit earlier. And so you have generations that have been educated here in our countries now, but that are very diverse. Maybe their parents migrated to our country, or maybe they're mixed heritage. And so that creates obviously a very diverse talent pool to source employees from. So through all these trends in societies, the intercultural dimension comes into our workplace and needs to be managed. Now, I like to show this chart at the beginning of my talks because I think it puts together quite brilliantly what the risks are when we neglect the intercultural dimension in our workforce. So obviously it's always a bit different on whether you're in the private sector, NGO, or public sector, but the risks are still almost always between 20 and 40%, and the risks are very real. You risk your global reputation, you can lose clients. That's something that's can be seen very much in the private sector. You can incur cultural insensitivities to clients and partners overseas, and you can have conflict within teams, and that can be really, really difficult to get away from again once that has come up. Another study done by The Economist asked, how much do cultural factors impact on your company's plans for international expansion? And if we look at the blue here, which said, well, the cultural differences actually hamper the plans for international expansion a lot, just look at how much of a role that plays. I would say, except for the Nordics, who are doing fairly okay, everybody has this problem of having culture in the way of reaching out. You know, so this is really something that is very important to address. And one last fact before we dive into the actual challenges. UK Trade and Investment, the government department, has done a study and has found that businesses in the UK have a cost of £48 billion per year because they neglect the cultural differences within themselves or with their partners and clients. And that is a huge cost. And I always like to bring this up because sometimes the intercultural skills are dismissed as, that's just a soft skill, there's no need to train on that. Well, there are actually hard numbers that show that we do need to work on this. Now, today's talk will be mainly about 3 challenges that I see with my clients when they have, when they have intercultural dimensions in their work, and how we can turn those into opportunities, and what those opportunities are that lie within the intercultural dimension. So the first challenge is that there can be a lack of cultural sensitivity, resulting in miscommunication and conflict within teams or external stakeholders. The second challenge can be that there are missing structures and processes that would make everything so much easier if only you had them in place. And the third challenge is that sometimes assignments are not made in the optimal mode, taking into consideration all the details of the intercultural dimensions, and dormant potential is missed out on and not activated. So when we go through these challenges, I will address them one by one now with a few examples. I'd like you to hold a picture in your head, just to make it clearer. I always like to work with images. I think that's my coach side. So think of a beautiful skyscraper. It doesn't have to be a London one, but I thought, this fits. Think of your organization and of yourself like being the master of construction of a beautiful building, whatever shape it has in your mind. And you will see why. We'll go through it now. So the first challenge. I'll always tell you one little example before showing the rest of this slide, because it's quite comprehensive, and the rest I will only touch upon due to limited time here. So the first challenge is if you have a lack of cultural sensitivity in your workforce, and if miscommunication and sometimes even conflict arises. So one example of how that can show is the different reception of messages. So employees, obviously everybody who talks or communicates sends a message, and they receive something else than the speaker actually wanted to transmit. So take the example of a Dutch boss in his headquarters in Amsterdam, and he's talking virtually to one of his team members situated in India. And he says, okay, I need this task to be done by then. Very direct communication, there's nothing to misunderstand. And then his Indian team member answers back, okay, I will try my best, boss. And the Dutch person, the boss, goes back after the conversation, ticks this off his list and says, okay, cool, I've handed this over, I can expect it to be back by that deadline. Because he is in his direct mode of communication. What he didn't get was the message that his Indian team member actually wanted to send, which was, well, actually, no. But I can't say no directly because I'm from an indirect country. So I will say, I will try my best, implying that actually I'm not really equipped for this task and somebody else might be better. So there we go. We have a message that was sent by somebody in one cultural context and received differently. So that is one example that can happen if our employees don't have that cultural sensitivity. Another example can be unaligned perspectives. So from people who are very much in their own worlds and in their own vision on the world, it's very hard sometimes to take the perspective of somebody far away who sees the world differently. And vice versa, there's no bad intention. It's just that it's hard to do for some people who didn't have training on this. And then there can be a lack of knowledge about sensitive issues, such as taboos, things that you don't discuss in public, for example, or preferences. So some people have a very formal communication style and working style, and they prefer that. And in other cultures, we prefer very informal and very warm ways of communicating. All of this then leads to miscommunication. In the worst case, it can lead to missing out on market access and trends, and thus unsuitable products, because your branches all over the world don't communicate back as efficiently as they could or should. And so you have inefficiencies, you can get resentments within teams, and I've even seen open conflict where people said, well, you're not trustworthy, I don't want to speak to you, and these kinds of things. Who's concerned by this challenge? It's teams with members of different cultures and languages. It's different departments. So departments within one firm can have completely different cultures. Think, for example, marketing and legal department. It can happen in mergers and acquisitions if the two companies that merge had very different mindsets and cultures. And obviously also in geographically dispersed teams that are, located in different countries. So first of all, they can't meet, but also they have different national cultures. And the remedies for this challenge are cultural skills and communications trainings, quite broad ones, for a broader audience of employees, these people that are concerned. Then country-specific trainings can be very important, because say you have your headquarters in the Netherlands and you work with an office in India and one in China and one in the US, it might be nice for everybody, to be able to place where everybody's at a bit more. And the cherry on top would be if you create a common culture. So, because what can happen if you train people on their differences is that they freeze. They get a bit scared, suddenly they're aware of all these differences and they know even less how to communicate. So if you then create a common culture, that can help to create a common identity and to speak freer and communicate better. And now, what's the opportunity if you address this challenge? We go back to our image of that building. It's that you create a very solid foundation for any intercultural work that's happening in your organization if you train your base of employees who have intercultural exposure. And it's also that you become a global player that can be taken seriously by its clients and partners because it is reflective of the cultural differences. So that's why I also put this image of the nice glass facade on there of our building, because people then see themselves in your products and in your firm's mentality. Advantages are that your deliverables come on time, and as discussed, you have better cooperation in your teams, you get more input, you break up silos and resentments, your products are adapted to the local needs and trends. You have a better reputation, you don't risk your reputation as much, you don't risk boycotts and things like that, which do happen to brands when they really offend people. And partners and clients see themselves in you. So there you have a wonderful facade and a wonderful foundation for your organization's building. Challenge number 2 is that actually a lot of problems can be resolved by putting the right structures and processes in place, but when they miss, well, that's a problem. One example, for example, is that if your teams can't meet either mentally because they're in different zones culturally, or physically they can't meet because they're in different geographic areas and they only ever speak on the computer, that can result in a lack of empathy. And empathy for each other, understanding each other, understanding where that person comes from and what they mean, that's the basis for trust. And if we don't trust each other, we easily disengage and we're easily not that motivated to hand in something good that will help that colleague, because we don't trust him. And now in normal scenarios where everybody's from the same culture and they're all in the same place, you can easily create empathy and trust in the coffee kitchen and by meeting over lunch and so on. And just speaking the same language, speaking about the topics everybody knows. For example, popular culture is a very good small talk topic to get to know somebody and take their perspective. All of that gets more difficult when you're from different cultures, and especially when you're in different geographical areas. Other topics where structures and processes can really help are language barriers. They can lead to native speakers overpowering conversations and other people zoning out, or they can lead to language silos where some people speak Chinese and some speak Indian and some speak English, but they don't really communicate with each other anymore. Time zones is an obvious one. Barriers to bringing up input and criticism can also be lowered if you have the right structures in place. And then, of course, technical modes of communication need to be structured and need to have proper communication on if you're working with different cultures or geographically dispersed. Who's most concerned by this challenge? It's really the global virtual teams who are all over the world and cross-border projects. So what are the remedies for this? To create more empathy, you need to give people the occasion to actually exchange something else than just work deliverables. And virtual small talk is a really good remedy to this. I'll go into this a bit more later in my tips for the current crisis. You can also think of special motivational measures that just show that you care. Think of national or religious holidays, you know, in one team's location. For example, Indian Diwali, in some regions, people get new clothes for this festivity. Why not send, you know, the newest branded t-shirt of your organization or so for that occasion? That just shows, hey, I got you and I care for you, and we know this is a very special occasion for you. Language, obviously you can put processes in place that ensure the participation of less fluent speakers, and also help native speakers understand how hard it is for less fluent speakers to, you know, get what they're saying and tune into the conversation. Considering fairness when considering time zones. So putting up a structure that doesn't end up putting always the same people in the situations that they have to take a phone call at 10 in the night. You know, even if the headquarters is the majority, they might also agree to once a month have a weird timed call so that the others can actually take that call in their work hours. Providing secure and regular dedicated brainstorming sessions that can really help to get more input and also get criticism from less direct cultures. And then providing clarity on which communication mode is best when. So when do we really need an online meeting, and when is it actually easier for everybody to just send a mail and we can spare those people in the other time zone those odd hours of work. Sorry, I'm fighting with a bit of a cold. What do we earn when we address this challenge correctly? We get enabling processes and solid structures, even for dispersed, mentally or geographically dispersed teams. So we have a nice structure for our building. It won't be shaken too quickly. Virtual teams feel committed and motivated. There is a raised potential for you to keep your talents, because that is another issue, obviously. If you have people who are only working with you remotely, it's hard to keep the talents. You get more diverse perspectives and input, and often, I mean, that's often the case why we want a diverse workforce anyway, and then we lose out on it because they don't get occasions to speak up. And so brainstorming sessions, as I mentioned, can help here very much. And we get more efficiency and less frustration from technical insecurity of which technical mode to use when working together. And now we're coming to challenge number 3, which is creating optimal assignments and recognizing dormant potential. So that really is a challenge. I first realized that when I did my first corporate and NGO trainings. And so I had a group of 20 people or so in the room. And towards the lunch break, and then also towards the end of the day in the Q&A session, people got really, really chatty, and they had so much to contribute to the discussion. And they had so many examples of how they dealt with something and how they managed to surpass an intercultural challenge. And they realized, or together we realized, well, that's actually a really big achievement, but it's kind of sad that you are just becoming aware of this right now after the training. And I mean, you've been doing this, your work, for 20-ish years or so. And also that it's just staying with you, or maybe with your little team, but it could be made into a best practice for your whole company, you know? So that's what I mean by recognizing dormant potential and by honing in on intercultural experiences of the workforce. Same goes for bringing back expats. So if you place somebody somewhere and they come back, I've seen it happening that they just come back and nothing happens and life goes on. And that's really sad, because usually such an experience of working somewhere else, being placed outside of your comfort zone, is so enriching, and you learn so much. And yes, you had challenges, but you overcame them, at least if it's a successful expat assignment. And I just think it would be so much better if people can share this, and then the whole firm gets something out of it, not just their little team or department. And Another problem is not recognizing the level of intercultural skill in every member that you employ. I'll get to that a bit later. Who's concerned by this? It's multiculturals. I'll explain who those are in the next slide. Repatriated expat staff and successful intercultural teams, or just individuals in successful intercultural teams. Remedies are to identify all the levels of multiculturalism your employees have, and then identify those of them that are doing so good that they can be your leadership stars. Let those experienced people share, build an internal knowledge pool or a pool of best practices that then other people can turn to, because often, you know, history repeats itself and the same mistakes are made again. And if you have such a pool, you can then obviously make everybody learn from one person's experiences. And then include intercultural skills in assignment and hiring decisions. I think this is done very well, obviously, today when it comes to the obvious skills, such as having language certificates or having attended an international university somewhere, having done an Erasmus year or expat assignment somewhere. But I'll get to it later, what I mean by the deep level and what I think is missed out often. And last but not least, really importantly actually, is then once you've identified them, once you know who those people are that have made successful experiences interculturally, support them, make them your leadership stars. Often awareness needs to be raised even with them. I'll also get back to that in the next slide. And they can be supported really well with mentors, either people on your workforce that have been there already as well, or with a professional coach. That's what I do quite often. So everything I said I'd get back to, I'm getting back to now. Who are those multiculturals? And I'd like us to focus on the first group that I have here, the lighter one, the cross-cultural kids. They are third culture kids, so people who have grown up in a country other than their parents for 1 year up to all their childhood. Children of mixed heritage, so mixed marriages and the children of those. International adoptees, children of immigrants and refugees, and children of borderlands. That is a group of people. Research has shown this. There's one researcher I like very much. Her name is Patricia Stocke, and she did a lot of research on how global leadership can learn from global nomads. And these cross-cultural kids are one group next to the cross-cultural adults that form the global nomads. And she has found in her research that actually what we are looking for in leadership skills today is something that is hard to train often once people are grown up, but that is very necessary to survive in today's globalized world, and that there is one group of people who have this because they grew up with it, and those are the cross-cultural kids. So they have basically been nurturing these skills from childhood onwards, and they are thus prone to be good global leaders. And the sad thing is that this knowledge, this research is not super well known yet. Let me tell you a few of the skills that these people naturally have because they grew into it from small on. They communicate perfectly with other cultures. They can hold several perspectives at once and juggle them. And that makes it easy for them to translate opportunities from one context to another one. They have high perseverance because they have had to start over and over and over and over again, often in their childhood, if they were very mobile. They have a high tolerance for uncertainty and ambiguity. So they can deal with this current world we're in, where change is a constant that is very volatile and ambiguous. And they are very skilled at integrating newcomers and minorities. And that's obviously also something we want for our teams. So that is what I meant by integrating this on a deep level. If you can analyze your workforce or people you want to hire and think, might they have a cross-cultural kid background? And make them aware and actually speak to them about this, because often, sometimes you can see that children of immigrants have been taught so much to adapt to their new culture that they actually don't see it as an advantage or a skill that they have. And if somebody can realize that and make them aware of that and make them develop these skills and make them conscious of these skills, then that can be really strong for your firm and for them personally. And obviously, just to mention them, we also have our cross-cultural adults, expatriates, immigrants, refugees, and people in mixed marriages. So they might also have many of the skills you're looking for. It's not as guaranteed as with the cross-cultural kids, but it's surely something to look into as well. So when you address that challenge, you can support your international, you can identify your international leadership stars, and then you can support them, and that gives you this beautiful elevator in your building that just propels everybody upwards. Your whole organization goes up. So you have stellar global leaders in your teams when you do that. You have top motivated stellar leaders because you helped them on a very deep level in their personal and professional development. And then they can obviously in turn support you with the previous two challenges. And there you have it. Whatever you were picturing as a building, you have your solid building with a good foundation, with a nice facade, with a good structure inside, and people who work like elevators, bringing everybody upwards. So that was basically my input of today about the challenges and opportunities that the intercultural dimension brings about. And as I promised, I'll now throw in 3 extra tips for remote work because we live in challenging time and because I have worked a lot with tips like these and I've applied them with teams when I work with global virtual teams. And I think, well, when this whole crisis came up, that actually made me think, well, actually, probably local teams can use some of this as well. So here we go. They are backed by research and they were tested on global virtual teams, like I said. They're based on Professor Cyril Neely's split method, which is a method to enhance the work of global virtual teams. And I adapted them to the needs or to what I see as some of the needs of non-global virtual remote working teams in COVID-19 times. Number 1 tip, show empathy and get feedback on routine interactions. Sorry. So like I said, trust is built by showing and receiving and living empathy. And I think it's something that is quite a challenge and it's tricky to do right now because we're all separated from each other. We can't have a little chat over a coffee and we can't just meet the 5 minutes before or after a meeting and have lunch together and whatnot. And so I've heard it from a few of my clients that they feel a bit secluded now and they feel almost inhuman, just like, okay, hand in this task, let's discuss this and this in the meeting. But yeah, they crave some connection and some empathy. And so as team leaders, what you can do is just ask, are those interactions that we've now put in place and that is now our new routine since a month or so, are they okay? So you can ask, is what we've been doing for over a month now working for everyone? What is your biggest challenge in the way I communicate with you right now? What could make life easier for you? You know, you could do this very well in a one-on-one talk. And what time zone is best for you? And by time zone, I'm thinking of parents. I'm a parent myself of 2 kids, and I think I'm living in American times right now, quite often work-wise. You know, I work quite late for European hours. And if you ask this to any parent on your team, I think they might be relieved. You might hear a sigh of relief and you might have them say, okay, actually my best time zone to have a call is A, during nap time, and B, once they're in bed. So could we, you know, have at least that one important meeting in one of those slots? You know, just evaluate what are the time zones of the people you have on your team and see if you can somehow find a good compromise that enables everybody to work. That would be my tip number 1. Tip number 2, don't let the fun die. Make use of virtual small talk. So I've just briefly mentioned this before. Whenever I propose virtual small talk to people, people first react like, oh, what's that? That sounds really weird. How do we do that? Let me first tell you the why again. Virtual small talk is necessary so that people feel human and so that people can take each other's perspectives, understand each other. They don't want to feel just like numbers, and they don't want to have that feeling that every time they meet it's only about facts and figures and work. So there is a need for virtual small talk just to, make everybody connect and understand each other. But it feels a bit weird at the beginning. How do you do that then? You need to take the lead on it, at least for the first 5 times where you do it. Schedule it in, announce that you're doing this now. For every, Monday meeting, there will be 5 minutes of small talk in the beginning. You take the lead, you ask everybody to contribute once you're on the call, and I would suggest you decide the topic and share it beforehand so that people don't feel too much under pressure that now they have to say something genuine. They can think about it a bit in advance. And examples would be like, what will be the first outdoor activity you do once Corona is over? And just to show you how that can help in, understanding each other, one person that is single and living at home, secluded right now, might say, well, I am so waiting to get back into team sports, beach volleyball, connecting with people, having fun outside. That's what I'm going to do. And somebody else who has 5 kids at home and is completely overwhelmed might be, well, I want to do yoga poses on a punting boat in Cambridge. And just sharing that information will help those people on your team also understand the struggles much better that they're going through without any rambling and so on, in a positive way. Other questions might be, what's the best comfort food right now? What new talent has Corona made you discover? Anything that's, nice for a little chit chat and sharing. And then my last tip is to make sure that you enable people to give you input and constructive criticism. So I told you about this in the context of different cultures. When in that context, we need to put a process in place to enable people, because you have more direct and more indirect communication styles, and the indirect ones might not be able to voice criticism on a group conference call because they feel that would be utterly disrespectful. Now, in our more local context of COVID-19, I still think this is important, simply because some people are more or less at ease with technology. So some people are very happy to be on a virtual meeting. They find it amazing to have their jogging pants on and a nice blouse. They share everything happily and freely. And some people are a bit hindered by this screen in front of them and by not having that possibility to just have an informal chat at the side of the actual meeting. And so to enable those people to also give input and criticism, I'd suggest what Professor Neely suggests in her split method is to put regular brainstorming sessions in your agenda. Make that part of the team's routine. Ask everyone to give input by name and start with the least senior person so that, they don't feel shy after, the 5 biggies in the team having spoken. And that can help you avoid the formation of groups that are more or less vocal. So those would be all my tips. After the webinar, Lily kindly told me that she will send an email out to you, and there will be a link to my website in that email where you can simply type in your email and your name, and in return you get my gift to you. You get exclusive access to my guide on 4 simple ideas against remote work disengagement during these times. So it's the 3 ones I just mentioned, plus a new one, a 4th one. And you'll also get a quite comprehensive worksheet where you can do your own assessment with your own organization in mind on what your intercultural international challenges and opportunities are, so that you can gain more clarity on where you might want to do something and which challenges you have to address. I hope you like my talk, and I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Brilliant, Eva. Thank you so much for that insightful and comprehensive talk. Very, very detailed with some really useful tips I'm certainly going to take away and share with others, especially around the remote working suggestions that you provided. Really good stuff, Eva. Thank you so much.
Well,
no, it's a pleasure to have you, and you clearly know your stuff. So I think this would be a great opportunity to pull everyone together. I know lots of people, I know the people on the call, we're all very from different cultures as well. So it'd be great to hear everybody's feedback and comments. Does anybody have any questions for Eva? Feel free to raise your hands if you do. Yes, we've got Sonali. Hey, welcome. Please unmute and ask away.
Hi Lily, and hi Eva. That was really, really interesting. So I have a really specific question actually. It was something that was raised by Lily at the beginning of the call, which was to do with relocating staff from overseas. So for example, if you were relocating someone from, say, India to Cambridge, what are the steps, the practical steps that you would take to make that successful?
Thank you for this question. Yeah, that's also something I work on a lot. I accompany expats as well a lot in that transition. So obviously there are a lot of practical steps, which I'm usually not working on, but I know them by heart because I've relocated so often. Obviously you need to find some kind of agency or do all the work yourself of finding the schools, the bank, the place they can live at, all those very practical things. But what I, from my point of view and from my work, would also suggest is that quite early on, you talk to the person and you see what are their individual needs in approaching this big transition mentally. And I would include their family in that, because if and when expat assignments fail, 70% of those failures are due to the family not being happy with the relocation. So I would quite early on speak to that employee and say, hey, okay, so what's your situation? Why did you apply for this position where we then relocate you? What are you looking for in that? And also try to figure out how family fits in there, and if there's any doubt. If, for example, the wife has to give up her career or the husband to follow, if there are children that need to change schools, anything that could make this transition a bit harder and thus take the focus of your employee away from work and getting into that new culture, I would give them support. That would be my one big suggestion. Give them support, give the family support as well.
Thank you very much. That's great.
Thank you, Sonali.
Brilliant. Any other questions from anybody? Or would anybody like to share any examples that have worked for them or best practice in terms of relocating or anything among teams? Emily, I'm kind of looking at you here and you've just raised your hand. Brilliant. So I know you are very adaptive. Do you want to share your thoughts?
So I have several experience, like living in different country in the world, where actually you used a word empathy that is really important, because I think at the end of the day, it's not the fact that we have global experience or not. Some human being will never have the chance to live abroad, but still they will be very global citizen too, just because they have a lot of empathy. So this is what I learned from all my experience globally. And one tip that you gave, this is actually one rule that I am applying at work. I always pay attention to people who have children, asking when it's best also to have call. Like previously I was working with China, so my colleague preferred when the daughter was in bed, and for me, I have also now working with US, I have forbidden my American colleague to put meeting for me between 5 p.m. and 8 p.m. I ask them to do it after 8 p.m. actually. I told them 5 to 8 is dinner and bath and story, and you don't touch that, please. So this was my comment. Thank you.
I love both of those comments. You're very right to point out that even people who don't have the privilege of moving can be global citizens and have global mindsets just because they have this amazing skill of empathy. And also the other thing is true. That's why I said, especially for the adult expats, having seen from the perspective of a child, a student, an employee, and a self-employed person, several expat communities, it can sometimes be revolting of how little empathy people develop, even though they're placed in other countries. I think you know what I'm saying. And also, I like that you stand up for yourself and the people you're working with who have children, because in the end, if employees are torn between children and work, and nowadays that is just so common that happens with homeschooling or having toddlers at home, you feel like you can't give what you want to give to anybody, not your children and not your work, and that's very frustrating.
Brilliant. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Eva. I wonder, Dr. Minhai, you've got a question. You've unmuted yourself and I can see you waiting patiently. You've got any comments for us?
Oh, just to say thank you so much, Lily. This is always very insightful, and it's good to see some familiar faces. Eva, perhaps if I may just touch on an area, it might be a little bit, if you don't mind me saying, risky area. You know, people have certain preconceptions of, you know, who you are, where you're from, how you look, how you speak, you know, all these things, you know, and I was born in, you know, in Kenya. You know, my family's originally from India 110 years ago, and I live in Scotland. I was in Cambridge for about 11 years prior to that. And of course, certain parts of the world, you know, people are more aware, people are more traveled, people are just more aware. Sometimes, you know, when you go to certain circles or certain groups, people love to stereotype. Yeah. Any thoughts, any reflections on this, perhaps, please? Thanks.
Actually, thank you. Thank you for sharing this and also asking this. It's something I have thought about a lot, actually, since starting in my studies to really reflect on intercultural communication, especially because in my line of work, there is always the risk that you contribute to stereotypes. For example, with the simple example I gave of the Dutch person being very blunt and the Indian person being very indirect, that can result in stereotyping. And giving, when I give company trainings, you know, for a group of 20 people, or specifically country-specific trainings, you have to be very careful not to create more damage and stereotypes than to create openness and opening perspectives. So I've thought about this a lot, and what I do is I confront it quite openly. And I think also in my life, I've been confronted with this. You know, I'm German. There are 150 very lovely stereotypes about Germans. And the biggest compliment people sometimes try to give me is by saying, "Oh, but you're not German." And then that is also, you know, a bit confronting, although it's meant nicely. So what I try to do is I'm very open about it. I try to say, look, I think you're falling into a trap here. Or if it's a training and nobody has voiced anything, I say, you know, it's easy to fall into this trap of stereotyping. And it's because our brains are meant to stereotype. It's how we learn, you know, from small on, we learn to understand things by classing them into little boxes and drawers. And you know, when we see somebody, we hear somebody's German accent, we see somebody's skin tone, and we put them into that box. And actually, well, we need to open our perspective enough and hold the possibility that, well, they might just not fit into a box, or they might be actually with one foot in that box and one arm in the other one, and they might be a beautiful mix. So in my trainings, I like to picture this as a puzzle. Which shows that we are all made up of so many different cultural influences that our individual identity actually can't be put into one box. I still think it's helpful to have country-specific trainings, because a lot of it on a general and broad scale will be true. But I think people always need to hold that possibility in their mind that somebody will not fit into the typical way a Chinese person works, and that they can be very hurtful if they class people too easily into boxes. So that's how I approach it. It's not the perfect answer, but I think it's something that is such a gray area that we just need to make people aware and put up all the options of how you can handle and perceive this. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you as well.
Thank you, Eva. A great approach to delicately address this. Excellent question by Minha. So I'm going to wrap up today's session. Does anybody have any final thoughts or comments before I do that? No. So on that note, I'd like to thank you again, Eva, for sharing an excellent talk. If you're interested in finding out more details on Eva's work and what she does, do head to her website. Eva, what's your website?
www.tarabichicoaching, like in my logo, or you can find it on the risingnetwork.com.
There we go. And Eva is also a good friend and a member of the Rising Network. So this won't be the last of her that you'll see. We've got lots of upcoming events with Eva joining us. And thank you everybody for joining us and partaking today and joining for today's session. So before I wrap up, I just want to spotlight on a few upcoming events that we've got taking place, just to make sure you don't miss out. Here are some upcoming events. Next one we have got is Mindfulness Poetry, which is an interactive workshop which falls into Mental Health Awareness Week. So do join us for that if you're looking at some ways to become more mindful through poetry. 28th of May, we've got Social Capital and the Rules of Engagement. On the 3rd of June, we've got 7 Daily Habits. In June, we've got a 3-week course on how to write and publish a book in 3 steps. That's an online course, 3 weeks. Online mastermind, Leading Through Uncertainty, and then an online masterclass on 24th of June, Personality Types and Leadership. But as I said, we are ramping up our online activities. So do check out therisingnetwork.com to see our latest events. More will be uploaded. I would also like to take this opportunity to spotlight, if you want to see Eva again and learn more from her, here are some more upcoming events that she's got. Next one is Intercultural Communication in the Workplace, which Eva touched on today. We've got a few more in October, Creating a Productive Diversity Paradigm for your company, and then in January, How to Give and Receive Feedback in Different Cultures. So thank you all again for partaking today. I hope to see you again in an upcoming event, and take care and see you soon. Thank you, everyone.